For joining me for another Alex on Tech video. I'm joined today by former FBI agent Jeff Lanza and Veeam's Nathan Steiner, Head of Systems and Engineering. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us, Alex.
Thank you for having us, Alex. Pleasure.
Thank you. Well, Jeff, can you please briefly tell us what roles you were doing at the FBI, how long you were there, and what you're doing today?
Right. So I worked for the FBI for 20 years. And most of my career, I was involved in white-collar crime. Wait, that doesn't sound right. I investigated white-collar crime. I wasn't involved in it myself. But one major portion of white-collar crime is cybercrime, and I had some opportunities to work some cybercrime cases. I was on a cybercrime squad for a while, but I worked all types of cases with the FBI. The focus in the early parts of the 2000s was on terrorism and continued for many years while I worked for the FBI. Human trafficking became something that was a big problem. I worked on those cases too. I retired from the FBI in 2008, and since then I've been kind of out talking about cybersecurity and some other topics too, but mostly how to keep individuals and businesses safe from some of the threats that we've seen in those years that since I retired and even before that, they've evolved, and the criminals are mutating around our defenses just like a virus would mutate, and we're trying to keep up with them. Seems like we're always one step behind, and we don't want to be more than that. So that's what my education is about.
Sure. And Nathan, can you please tell us a bit about Veeam in 2020 and briefly about your role as Head of Systems and Engineering?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Alex. I guess, I'm 4.5 years head of systems engineering, Australia, New Zealand, reporting into Asia Pacific, Japan. So a lot of my reach and involvement, covers an APJ market. But, in my role as head of systems engineering, I think, what we're seeing, today is a very use case based approach over cloud data management and data protection. And when we start to look at cybersecurity, particularly in 2020, that's been the number one challenge and the number one risk item for CEOs and CIOs going into 2020. And ransomware forms the top of that list. So a big focus for us is looking at, where we play, cloud data management across a hybrid multi-cloud, when we start looking at geography, targets, segments, and the proliferation across platforms. How does Veeam deliver a risk-managed approach, and what strategies can align to ransomware as it pertains to cybersecurity and a cloud data management platform? So that's what I help customers with.
Okay. So Jeff, part of what you were going to talk today about is the evolution of cybercrime over the past 5 decades. So what was a cyber attack like at the beginning? And what's an example of one of the worst forms of cyber attack today? I mean, ransomware on steroids, I'm guessing.
Right. So if you want to go back to the beginning of this, the cyber crime attacks, while the FBI was focused on counterterrorism, we had a lot going on in the world of computers and networking and the internet, people using the internet for more and more things like online banking and payment processing in stores. And that was all happening, throughout this time when the focus of law enforcement was on counterterrorism after 9/11. And so the criminals took the advantage of that opportunity and started intruding into computers, right, to get information, to get credit cards and debit card information and other information that they can monetize. But it was a two-step process. That to get the information and then monetize it. And then companies started being more, creative about protecting those particular systems from intrusions, computer intrusions. So then the evolution changed after that. The criminals figured out, well, if we can't intrude into a computer, and I'm not saying they don't do that today, there's lots of that going on, but to a lesser extent than it was earlier. We can't intrude into a computer to take money, to take information and monetize it. Let's just go right to their bank account and send money to our accounts from their account. Bank account takeovers, wire transfer fraud starting to become a very popular crime, where they would send malware in the form of an email, links or attachments, and that would download credential stealing malware like the Zeus Trojan to the victim's computer. They'd steal bank login credentials, wire money out of bank accounts, millions of dollars lost that way. Companies started wising up to this, right? They started protecting those accounts and using methods to keep criminals out of your bank accounts. And so the criminals mutated again, just like a virus mutates. They decided, all right, we can't transfer money out of bank accounts. We'll just get you to do it for us. And they started spoofing emails and doing hijacking of email accounts of companies' CEOs and sending it to key players in the company, key leaders involved in the finances of a company, to wire money to foreign accounts. And this was successful over and over and over again. It still is today. CEO or spoofing the boss, we call that in terms of that type of crime. And then now we've moved into, since companies are more careful and are wised up about that, we moved into ransomware. But you mentioned what is probably the most serious attack that occurred. Besides the ransomware, which we'll get into more detail, I'm sure, in a few minutes, the wire transfer fraud that took place with stolen credentials from the Bank of Bangladesh in 2016. This was money that was controlled by the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, but it was the Bank of Bangladesh's money. And over the weekend in 2016, criminals with stolen credentials transferred over $100 million to bank accounts around the world. None of that money, or very little of it, has been recovered. And it would have been $1 billion fraud, except one of the hackers spelt the name of the recipient of the money incorrectly. And someone at the Fed, it was on the weekend, by the way, someone at the Federal Reserve Bank, the skeleton crew working over the weekend, unlikely to notice these wire transfers, did see the misspelling and stopped all wire transfers till they got that figured out. Otherwise, the loss would have been $1 billion. So that was probably the biggest in terms of loss of money and type of crime we've seen occur in computer crime. And when you get to ransomware, of course, you talk about not just ransom being paid, but companies that have been down, and the remediation and the loss of being out of business for the period of time until they get their computers back up and running. That's the real crime behind ransomware. It's the loss of money that's related to downtime.
Yes. Excuse me. So obviously we're now all locked down and working from home. So how have you seen cyber criminals taking advantage of that, hacking into people's home routers to penetrate work networks, and what are the global costs of these cyber attacks?
I wish there was a number that was accurate as to the global cost. We see a lot of numbers thrown out there regarding cyber attacks, but those are only the ones that get reported. I think the true numbers must be much higher than that. So you have people working at home. There's less security at home. There's less security with networks and Wi-Fi in a home. It's not always locked down like it should be, and even in businesses it may not be. But in homes, there's certainly probably less security. In addition to the fact that now you have lots of communication taking place, the cat's away, the mice will play, and you have people that would normally be at an office keeping track of things that are going on in computer systems and monitoring those systems may not be working in those offices as well. So that creates issues, not just for now, but in the future for criminals who may have planted malware on a computer of an employee who's working remotely, and then they make it into the office or connect with the networks in the office. That's when the malware can then start to do its dirty job. So all those things are in play right now, in addition to the fact that hospitals are in crisis modes around the world, and the criminals are attacking them with ransomware attacks with no conscience at all, not even concerned about the effect they'll have on healthcare in general, but particularly during this crisis, knowing that they're more likely to get paid by a hospital who's already experiencing one crisis and then has their computers locked up and can't treat patients during this crisis.
Now, Nathan, Veeam famously had some backups deleted from one of its customers who was attacked by ransomware. This was earlier last decade, so it's some time ago. But what were the lessons that Veeam sort of learned from this, and also the entire industry? And how does Veeam do ransomware prevention in 2020, and what are the best practices?
Yeah, I think, in terms of, where we look at, market impacts, we always look at those 4 vectors that are expanding in terms of platform, geography. We look at segment. When we look at, the potential impacts, it's twofold. It's data breaches, loss of data, versus loss of availability and loss of access. If we look at an Australia, New Zealand market, over the last 12 months, and these numbers are new and just released, $241 million is the current cost of ransomware that's reported. So we believe that's understated. So we're looking at $241 million over the last 12 to 15 months of ransomware impact. In terms of total loss of revenue based on downtime, we're looking at about $1.6 billion over the last 12 to 15 months within an Australian New Zealand market. So when you start to look at those numbers, that starts then to determine how much gets invested in making sure that ransomware, as it aligns to cybersecurity, gets the level of investment required, and B, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we've had a lot of discussions when we talk about segments: SMB, cloud, commercial, enterprise, government, public service agencies. Every organization is vulnerable to being impacted by ransomware. From a Veeam perspective, how do we help our customers? We really take on a holistic strategy, and we focus on strategy as well as feature, function, and capability that's market differentiating across three core approaches. The first one is about prevention, making sure that you've got capabilities built into your platform that aligns to a 3-2-1 strategy, 3 copies on 2 different medias, one of which is offsite, and making sure that it's 100% air-gapped. So when you combine our 3-2-1 strategy, being able to provide immutability over a write once, read many approach, Veeam allows a customer to be 100% ransomware proof when you apply immutability to that 3-2-1 approach. This next one around prevention is being able to recover very, very quickly, being able to do it high speed. And that's where we start looking at capabilities around short backup. Not to mention then you move into monitoring. So how do you provide the proactive approach, not just before, but potentially during an attack? How do you get onto it quickly? Intelligent diagnostics and very specific ransomware alerts and alarms. So Veeam has built into its Veeam One monitoring system, as well as intelligent diagnostics, the ability to pick up if there is a potential ransomware attack happening in a data silo within your organization across a hybrid multi-cloud environment, by being able to pick up high ransomware IO, particularly hitting a storage subsystem. And then what do you do if you're picking up that attack? That's where the intelligent diagnostics comes into it, the ability to potentially fail over mission critical, business critical workloads into a safe area of your data center, being able to make sure or instantiate a set of snaps to say, okay, we haven't been hit by ransomware, we think we are, let's snap a last known good state of our production environment so that if this eventuates and impacts the environment, we can recover our recovery point objective to the last known good time to completely minimize the impact of that ransomware attack. And then we move on to that third strategy and that third approach around remediate and analyze. So when we've got large petabytes of data being stored in structured and unstructured silos across hybrid multi-cloud ecosystems, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. How do we recover and provide access and availability really, really quickly? And that's when we start to look at our capabilities around multi-VM instant recovery, being able to restore very, very quickly, no matter where that data is sitting in terms of a backup repository, whether it's high-performing disk on-prem, in a managed service provider, being able to restore that very quickly, or from public cloud environments. And then from an analyze perspective, how do you look at your backups? How do you look at your data repositories that you've got? And how do you then tie them into forensics, AI, machine learning, third-party subsystems that says, is our data clean? Can we make sure that there's nothing resident or sitting there dormant from a zero-day exploit perspective in our existing data repositories? How do we make sure that if we need to recover data, that we're not going to instantiate a ransomware attack because we've got ransomware sitting there? So it's that prevention, monitor, remediate, and analyze across a holistic strategy.
Okay, and so Jeff, what sort of cyber hygiene do you think the FBI would be practicing today? I mean, you left in 2008, so that's 12 years ago, but I'm sure you probably still have some idea or some contacts and connections. And is it any different to what enterprises are doing? You know, I'm assuming that the FBI would have the same sort of protections that Nathan was just telling us about, with being able to restore very quickly and snapshots and multi VMs to get back online in the event that you see in movies where people hack into the FBI.
Yeah.
But the real world must be quite different.
Well, I would hope it would be. So I'll give you some tips that the FBI is telling people now, today, 2020, much different than what we were doing in 2008. But I will say this about the FBI in terms of their own computers. They were well behind the times for a long time. So we were still doing, DOS when the whole world was in Windows 95 and so forth and so on. And that's when I worked with the FBI. It was a major challenge when we had some leadership changes there in the early parts of right after 9/11, the computers needed to be updated. They were updated, and I think the FBI is pretty much up to current standards in terms of their backup and how they protect their data against these hackers who are constantly trying to get into them and other federal agencies like the NSA and the CIA and many other organizations as well. Just a couple of tips from the FBI about for people in general to mitigate the effects of ransomware, to prevent ransomware from even happening to them. Just make sure employees are aware of ransomware. Short education about it, is critical in protecting the organization. So people know that if they get this weird looking email and there's some attachment in there and they've never seen it before, it's from someone they don't know, why click on that? And they should also companies should ensure that very few people have administrative privileges to be able to download things to the computer or the network as well. So configuring access controls and directories and network sharing permissions should be done appropriately to prevent the spread of malware within an organization. They also talk about ensuring, and this is such a simple thing, but it's not always done, keeping antivirus software, anti-malware software up to date and making sure that you have it in place, but it's also updated on a dynamic basis so you're safe against the latest threats, and that would include software in general, staying up to date. When the WannaCry ransomware attack hit in 2017, it went after a vulnerability in the Windows system, which had been patched, when Microsoft had announced when they became aware of it, because Eternal Blue, the NSA, that's the National Security Administration's that secret organization in the United States government, had developed this particular computer program to spy, right? But it got out there in the public domain, took advantage of a Microsoft vulnerability. Microsoft patched it, but the companies that did not install that patch were the ones that got hit by WannaCry. 150 nations, thousands of organizations affected by locked up computers based on that vulnerability. So updating software, patching systems, when these vulnerabilities pop up are also important things too. And then I'll just add one more thing. There's a whole list of them. You can find them on the FBI website. I know we don't have time to go into every single one of them, but what Nathan said about, the backups, the 3-2-1 backups, and I like to put it in simple terms for non-IT audiences that I talk to, which is some of my groups that I talk to as well. I just say, I talk about air gap backup, and a lot of people say, what do you mean by that? And I just say, well, let's look at it this way. You got your computer system, right? You're backing up into the cloud, or you're backing up to a hard drive that's connected to your computer. That can get encrypted too. Your backups are going to get encrypted if you get hit by ransomware that's connected to your physical system. Maybe even the backups in the cloud will get affected too. So how about taking a hard drive, downloading all your files, your important things, your tax return, your family photos, your videos, all the things that would mean a lot to you if they got stolen or locked up. How about pulling those on a hard drive, put them on a hard drive every day or every week at least, and throwing them in a drawer and locking that drawer, keeping them safe in there. That's an air gap backup on a local perspective. And I think companies need to do the same thing virtually, of course. And I think Nathan described that a little bit as well.
Sure. What security software do you use? Norton 360, Malwarebytes. Are you PC, Mac, Linux, iOS, or Android?
I'm an Apple person when it comes to my phone. I'm in the Windows environment. So I like to, if you want to throw out names here, I think Windows Defender does a pretty good job in a Windows 10 environment of keeping computers safe. And I think you need to augment that with something else, and that would be a program like Malwarebytes. Works really well to help you find stuff that's got past your perimeter security for an individual security platform.
Sure. Now, I just want to end on the usual 3 questions that I end on. How do you think, both of you, that the security industry will look like in, say, 2030? I mean, we might have brain augmenting chips or computers by then, which I've read about in sci-fi. And of course, if they get hacked, you could have part of your cognitive ability ransomware out of existence? How do you think things will look in 2030?
Nathan, I'll go first, and I know you're going to have a really, really good answer for this, but I want to just throw out one thing. In between now and 2030, that's a 10-year time frame, and I think by that time, quantum computing is probably going to be not perfected, but at least in our usage. And we just got to hope that the good guys get it first before the bad guys, because that can break cryptology, right? Quantum computing is going to change everything, and if the bad guys get it before we do, that's going to be a problem. So we have to worry about making sure we get it first, just like the United States got nuclear capability before Germany did.
Nathan?
Yeah, I think 2030, I'll put it into an APJ context. 66% of the world's middle class is going to exist within the Asia Pacific Japan region. So there's a huge responsibility and a huge opportunity for organizations in terms of what that will mean. When we link that into cybersecurity and what 2030 looks like, I think to Jeff's point, it touches upon two areas. Quantum computing is a big one. Artificial intelligence and machine learning is another. The level of sophistication and the speed at which things will get processed, decisions will get made, and output gets driven. When you look at the proliferation of Internet of Things, we'll have more of a digital economy. So when you combine that with AI and ML, things will get much more sophisticated. Now, on one side, you'll have how do you manage risk, how do you manage prevention, how do you minimize downtime, and how do you ensure access and availability is maintained. It will go on to a much greater level and much greater speed. On the other side of that, you'll have cyber criminals also leveraging those tools. Make no mistake, they will also have access to quantum computing, AI and ML to get more sophisticated as to how they can potentially impact and gain financial advantage. So, where I'm seeing 2030 is, really having the strategies will be exactly the same. The methods and the approaches will be exactly the same. The tools and how you apply them is what will change significantly. And it will all be built around AI, ML, and, making sure that defense in-depth strategy continues to, keep one step ahead. And hopefully organizations will have the greater leverage and weight of investment to mitigate against the risk of the same tools that criminals are, are always, keeping one step ahead no matter what the technology.
Sure. And my second last question is always just to change gears a little bit and just to ask you both to please share the best advice you've received in life to help you get where you are today.
I'll say perseverance, right? You can overcome almost any obstacle if you just persevere. That would be advice I learned as a young person. And that's what got me in the FBI, because it's not an easy agency to get into. I'm surprised it even took me, as a matter of fact.
And Nathan?
Yeah, absolutely. Attitude, consistency, and discipline. If you apply those three things to everything that you do, you will always come out the other side, in a better way. So I think, throughout my career, personally, professionally, it's always apply a positive attitude. Always, work with consistency and discipline. And sometimes discipline is doing things consistently that you don't want to do.
Sure. And my final question is simply to ask what your final message is to the viewers and to your customers and partners.
I would just say, you've heard this before, but stay safe. We're going to get through this. We're going to get through this together. The world's going to be a better place. I hope it happens before too long, but we're going to be looking at this a couple of years from now, and we're going to be, I think we're going to be better off. Not that this happened, but that we've improved many things because of it.
And from my perspective, customers, partners, alliances, vendors, it's everybody's responsibility. The onus is on everyone. So, my recommendation would be every individual, every organization, every government service agency has a responsibility to take accountability for staying safe, implementing practices, whether it's, changing their passwords, whether it's, being open and, always vigilant with respect to what a potential risk may be. It's everybody's responsibility, not just one part of it. So everyone has their role to play, their job to play. And if we all do it together, then we will always, come out the other side of managing risk and impact.
Yes, physical and digital hygiene has never been more important. Jeff and Nathan, Thank you very much for your time. I know you have many more interviews today, so I really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope to talk to you again.
Thank you, Alex.
Alex, thank you. Thanks. Have a great day.
You too.